Evelyn May Carter had lived 79 years without ever raising her voice at anyone, the kind of woman who watered neighbors' plants, baked pies for the church, and sat on her porch knitting while the world rolled faster and faster around her, leaving her a gentle relic of a time when decency was a language everyone spoke. On that warm Friday morning, she walked slowly with her cane toward the Midtown First National Bank, her purse tucked under her arm, containing a check from her late husband's pension fund. Nothing fancy, just $480, enough to pay her utility bills and buy groceries for the next 2 weeks. She hummed to herself as she pushed open the glass door, nodding politely to the security guard who barely looked up from his phone. Inside, the air conditioning blasted too cold, the line moved too slow, and the bank manager, an uptight man named Harold Benton, paced behind the counters with the kind of permanent scowl that suggested smiling might break his jawbone. Evelyn waited patiently, leaning against her cane, unaware that the teller she was approaching, Sandra Price, had been reprimanded twice that month for approving checks too quickly, making her overly cautious and almost desperate to avoid another mistake. So when Evelyn slid the pension check across the desk, Sandra's eyes narrowed in suspicion, not because of the amount, not because of the signature, but because Evelyn looked too plain, too unassuming, the kind of elderly black woman who, in Sandra's mind, didn't fit the profile of someone who should be carrying a pension check at all. The teller stalled, asked unnecessary questions, typed slowly, called the manager over for verification, whispering something that made Harold's eyebrows lift sharply as he stared at Evelyn like she had smuggled in a live grenade. Evelyn's smile faded into confusion as Haral asked her where she got the check, who wrote it, why the amount was so specific, and whether she could provide additional identification. She politely produced her driver's license, her social security card, even an old laminated medical card, but Harold only grew colder. After a tense minute, he stepped aside and quietly dialed the police, claiming he had a fraudulent suspect attempting to cash stolen checks. Evelyn didn't hear every word, but she caught enough to feel the first tremor of fear tighten her breathing. She tried to ask what was wrong, but Harold held up a dismissive hand, telling her she needed to wait for verification. The other customers glanced over but quickly looked away, as if eye contact might pull them into trouble. Evelyn stood frozen, gripping her cane, praying nothing would escalate after all. She'd done nothing wrong. Surely someone would see reason. But when the bank doors swung open 10 minutes later and 2 young officers stepped inside, Officers Trent Murphy and Jason Reed, their hands already resting near their cuffs, she felt the world tilt beneath her feet. They approached Harold, who exaggerated his whispering to make himself seem heroic, pointing subtly at the elderly woman trembling by the counter. The officers walked over, their expressions already hardened with assumption. Officer Murphy demanded to see her identification again, flipping her cards in his hand like he was searching for flaws that weren't there. Without giving her time to explain, they grabbed her wrists, twisting them behind her back. Evelyn cried out in pain, begging them to stop, explaining that the check was hers, that she had never even gotten a parking ticket, but the officers ignored her, pushing her toward the center of the lobby as phones came out, customers recorded, and Harold pretended to assist by holding the doors open like he was ushering out a criminal. Tears slid from Evelyn's eyes as she tried to steady herself on her cane, but Officer Reed knocked it aside, letting it clatter across the floor. She stumbled, falling to her knees as the officers tightened the cuffs, ignoring her cries that they were hurting her. Outside, on the sidewalk, the rumble of 6 Harley-Davidson engines idled in steady sync. 6 men in leather vests, marked with the unmistakable flaming skull of the Hells Angels, sat casually, arms crossed, eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses except one man, a huge gray-bearded biker with weathered tattoos crawling up his arms, who sat up straighter the moment he saw Evelyn being dragged out of the bank, his jaw clenched. His nostrils flared, because that woman wasn't just a stranger, she was family. The gray-bearded biker, known on the streets as Crusher, but known to only a handful of people by his real name, Leonard Carter Jr., swung one heavy leg off his Harley and stood up slow enough that the officers didn't notice at first, but the other angels did. All 5 of them straightened, silently sinking behind him like a unit trained not by manuals, but by instinct, loyalty, and lived violence. Crusher stared at the scene unfolding just feet away, his chest rising and falling with a cold fury that almost crackled in the air. To the world, Crusher was a monster vice president of the local hells. Angel's chapter, a man who once broke a biker's jaw for disrespecting a waitress, the kind of dude who could silence an entire bar just by walking in. But Evelyn May Carter? She wasn't afraid of him. She never had been. Because she was his mother. And she was the only human being on Earth who could call him Lenny and live. Right now, though, she was shaking, her thin wrists swallowed by metal cuffs, her knees scraped from the fall, her breath coming out in frightened little gasps that made something primal and ugly awaken in Crusher's blood. Officer Murphy hauled her outside like she was a piece of shoplifted merchandise, while Officer Reed followed, radioing in some nonsense about elderly suspect resisting. Resisting? The woman could barely stand. The other angels, Redbone, Mako, Fuse, Diesel, and Tiny, the one who was 6 feet 6 inches and absolutely not tiny, watched Crusher's face, each man waiting for the slightest signal. They'd seen that look before. It meant someone was about to have a very, very bad day. Murphy shoved Evelyn toward the patrol car, complaining loud enough for passers-by to hear, accusing her of trying to pull a scam, mocking her age, telling her that crying doesn't change the crime. Crusher's fist clenched so hard the leather of his gloves groaned. He took a slow step forward, and that's when Evelyn, with tears streaking her cheeks, finally saw him. Her eyes widened, not with relief at first, but with dread, the kind only a mother feels when she knows her son is about to do something that could ruin his life all over again. "Lenny, no," she whispered, barely audible, but Crusher heard it. He always heard her. But he was too close to the edge to listen. The officers turned at the sound of her voice, noticing the massive shadow approaching them, the skull patch on his vest, the heavy boots, the expression of pure murder simmering behind his sunglasses. "Sir, back up," Officer Reed barked, trying to sound authoritative, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Crusher didn't stop walking, didn't slow, didn't blink. "Take the cuffs off my mother," he said, his voice low, steady, and the kind of calm that made the rest of the angels subtly fan out behind him in a loose semicircle. Traffic slowed. People across the street stopped walking. Phones came out. Something big was about to go down. Murphy scoffed, stepping between Crusher and Evelyn like he was 10 feet tall. "Your mother? Buddy, nice try. She's under arrest for check fraud." Crusher's jaw flexed. The angels exchanged looks. Oh, good, the cops just poked the tiger with a stick dipped in gasoline. "That check," Crusher growled, "came from my father's pension. My father who served this country 40 years. My father who died 2 months ago, and you're manhandling his wife?" Murphy rolled his eyes. "Yeah? Prove it." The disappointment on Crusher's face was almost worse than his rage. "I don't prove anything to a man too stupid to tell the difference between a criminal and a grandmother." Evelyn whimpered softly. "Lenny, don't." But Reed didn't hear her. Murphy didn't care. Both officers took a step closer to Crusher, hands landing on their holsters, not drawing. Just warning, which was almost funnier, considering they were surrounded by 6 men who had seen more fights than these rookies ever would. Redbone shifted his weight, cracking his knuckles like thunder. Tiny muttered, "Hope these kids wrote their wills." Mako chuckled under his breath. The tension stretched so tight a single breath could snap it. Murphy pointed at Crusher's chest. "Last warning, back, up," and that was it. Not because of what he said Crusher had been threatened by better men. No, what made Crusher finally snap was the moment Murphy shoved him. Right in front of his mother, Evelyn gasped. Crusher's expression didn't change. He simply moved. Lightning fast for a man his size. His hand shot out, grabbed Murphy's wrist, twisted it behind the officer's back in a way that made the rookie yelp like a kicked dog. Reed reached for his taser, But Redbone was already there, knocking it out of his hand with one smooth slap and catching it before it hit the ground. By the time the taser landed in Redbone's vest pocket, Diesel had stepped behind Reed, gently for him, placing one tattooed forearm around the officer's neck, not choking him, just discouraging bad decisions. The crowd gasped, cars honked, people ran for cover. A homeless guy nearby muttered, "Ooh, they gonna die." Evelyn cried, "Lenny, stop!" "Please." Only that voice cut straight through Crusher's rage like a blade. He released Murphy instantly, letting the officer stumble forward. Diesel loosened his hold. Redbone tossed the taser onto the sidewalk like garbage. Crusher turned to Evelyn, pulling off his gloves so he could cup her face gently, wiping her tears with hands that had broken bones, but never once laid a finger on her in anger. "Ma, I got you," he whispered. "Nobody's hurting you again." But before the moment could settle, something shifted in the air, a new presence, a new danger. A sudden silence rippled through the crowd as 3 black SUVs turned the corner, speeding toward the bank, tires screeching, engines snarling, government plates, tinted windows, and an energy that didn't feel local. Crusher's eyes narrowed. The angels went still. Reed paled. Murphy froze, because whoever was arriving wasn't here for a calm conversation. And Crusher knew, deep in his gut, that this story was about to get way messier than cops and bank managers. Something bigger was coming. Something connected to his mother. Something she hadn't told him.